We can get started. So this is a little bit about me. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn and even on Discord right now, which if you have access for any questions. Uh, Coming back to the today's agenda, we'll talk about the specifically API security today, and we'll also touch base upon some web security aspects of it as well. I will talk about the case studies, some demo examples, and some best practices to use, and even we'll see some practical solutions for the scene, and we'll share some accents and notes. So I was on this specific slide last time. Like you can see, like there's a drastic growth in the people who are using internet right now. Like from in 20, case of 2022, you can see 75% of the population is using internet and consuming a lot of data. Apart from that, by 2030, there is a 90% growth which is expected to happen for this. So there's explosive growth going on when you talk about internet, right? So, and when you talk about this explosive growth, there are certain APIs which are the building block of the digital transformation. When you talk about any application, APIs associated to it. So 90% of the traffic is API nowadays. So will have the UI interface, but mostly it is connected with the API application programming interface. Like if you talk about financial application, if you talk about e-commerce application, if you talk about Discord as a community, right? Smartphones and everything has a backbone of APIs, and that is why they are very important blocks of ecosystem. What is an API? So API stands for the application programming interface, which acts as a layer between two application, client and server, and it has certain sets of rules and protocols. If I tell in terms of an example, like if you go to any restaurant or you wanted to order something, so you can see the waiter is one of the API which will talk with the will give the place the order for the waiter. It will go back to the kitchen, ask for the specific food you wanted on the plate, and then he'll come back and give that food. So that waiter acts as an API here. So this is how API works in a simple way. Uh, and when you talk about API, if you turn on, you will get like there's a request and a response coming in from an API. So in this case, food, he get a request of a food and then he gave back the food to the onto the table. That is a response. So yeah. So in the traditional terms, there are two kind of approaches. One is traditional API and one is a modern API. So traditional API, which we explained in the previous slides also, but in the modern application API, some amount of data also resides in the client side as well, right? So there are certain central APIs which are being leveraged and which is store the data at their own client side end as well. So you fetch some data and there's a server and a client association happening. So on the client side also there are certain amount of data which has been placed. So this is how the new traditional approach is also there. Also, like there is a term called as microservices, which has been used in the modern applications, right? We have a monolithic application in the previous areas, but nowadays in microservices, even if one microservices is switched out, like basically microservices is nothing but a chunk of module of different one application, where like even if the one application module is down, the another fours are uh, pending, and they can run the application well. And yeah, that is it about. We'll not go into microservices in detail, but a background of it. So I'll take one example of a fintech application and an e-commerce application. So in the case of fintech application, you can see like earlier what was happening, like there's a bank A, bank B, and bank C, and all have has their own applications and on internal bank APIs, and which were providing certain services to the customer, and that services is been used by the customer. But in the case of new API modern way, like we have third party portals, like we have applications like in India specifically, if I say, we have applications like UPI or phone pay, or any other application like Google Pay, and even the credit card system works in the similar fashion. Like we have certain portal which has access to all the other banks, like you can take out money from the same, you can send money from the same as well, and all the data resides at that specific client side third party applications as well. So that is the modern traditional way to take the access of any driven application or the new area. Similarly, in e-commerce application, you can see an Amazon kind of thing, right? You have one platform, and it's a platform where like multiple shop vendors and the customers come together and buy the products and sell the products likewise. So basically, one application platform kind of application has a lot of amount of data and uh, 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 a lot of API association with different customers, consumers, and as well as the uh, product providers as well. So this is how the new modern approach is happening. It's more majorly a platform approach which people are taking nowadays, and that platform API needs to be tested very well because it consists both the amount of data of the vendors data as well as the consumers data as well. So this is a very important area to look for. Uh, why API security? Today we are talking about the same. Why API security? Because 83% of the traffic is API. This was the previous data, but even if you check the Postman's new data, a lot of requests have been skyrocketed, and 46 plus million collections are present on the same. And you can see Akamai is one of the bigger organization in this area. So 83% of the traffic was API in 2018 only. So nowadays you can see think of like 90 plus percent of the traffic might be API calls. So even Postman lot of time post blogs like what is the growth in the API traffic. We can read about it as well. So uh, it is important because like Gartner research that in 2022 only there were a lot of attack breaches happening, and 90% of the application is API layer, which we have to make sure that there is no breach happening, and you can see API attack graph increased by 192% from the previous one with the non-API attacks. Earlier, we were used to having a OWASP Web Top 10 where we have SQL injections, cross-site scripting, and rest of the area. But nowadays we have very certain new vulnerabilities coming up in the market, and which is very essential to tackle uh, as a part of it. So that's why API security is becoming a lot more important nowadays. uh, you can also see certain evidences of the same as well as why it's important. Like you can see a lot of Facebook data leak has happened in 2019. 530 million Facebook records. Now it's renamed to Meta. So that is a different area. But yeah, so in 530 million Facebook users was record was stolen. Then thousands of API and cryptographic key was leaked from the GitHub. So mostly we put a lot of keys and API keys and JW tokens on GitHub, which might be stolen. So that is something is very important to understand, like what to store, what not to store on the public repositories, what you're having. And there are a lot of other evidences of the same. We will when we once we'll go to the next steps, we'll understand like at what layer, what kind of issues are happening. So we should consider API security at multiple levels. It's not just application layer, but we should also focus on communication layer, virtualization layer. Like we have Docker, hypervisor, and rest of the stuff. Even we have hardware layer. We have OS, network, physical access, and a lot of things. So once you are completing all this area, then you can make sure that you are actually securing the complete overall architecture of your application. So now we will come on to the main topic, which is OWASP API journey. Like when you talk about any security project or anything, there is a organization called as OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project, and it is a non-profit foundation organization that works to improve the security of software. It has been started its journey from December 2001 itself, and it's the most leading organization in this area. Apart from that, here but later on, like earlier we were just focusing on web application. You can see the name also they have given is open web application project, but later on they realized there is more adoption in API in mobile and other areas, so they have launched API security project for the first time in 2019, and now they are also researching into this area. So after every 4 years they launch top 10 of it, like what is the OWASP web top 10 of what is the OWASP API top 10, and the first launch was in 19 and in second launch was in 23. So this year only they have launched some new top 10 of the API as well. This was the 19th launch which we will look into, and in future we will also understand like what are the differences from 19 to 21. A little bit of the API changes are like vulnerability change are there. So these are the OWASP API security top 10. uh, Broken object level authorization, broken user authentication, excessive data exposure, lack of resources, mass assignment, security misconfiguration, injection, insufficient logging, and improper asset management. You can see there's a color assigned. Like we have bucketed out the 10 vulnerabilities. One is with respect to authentication and authorization area. One is with respect to data protection policy area. One is with respect to governance or operations area. So that is why these colors are there for each bucket. So we will go through each of the bucket and understand the importance of the same. So first thing is about authentication and authorization. It is very important to start with the security as well. When you talk about authentication, it makes sure that confirms the user that who you are as a user. You are having a valid credential, you are authenticated to the application. Whereas authorization talks about like even if you are a user, do you have a right permission to access the page? I cannot log in using Arun's account into Discord, right? Because I'm not authorized to view Arun's account, for example. So I can only log in through my account. So I'm not authorized to view the other person's account without his permission. So this is what the authorization is for. So there comes the first vulnerability, which is broken object level authorization. So we will see the vulnerabilities and also the practical examples of the same parallel. So when you talk about broken object level authorization, you can see that we have one user try to uh, if even if we have a right authentication, he will try to authorize the application by using some fake IDs. Like in the example, you can see the same user is logging into 1001 and 1002, which is not possible. So he is trying to get the document by different ID just by passing the and that is why you are able to understand it is a broken object level authorization vulnerability, because he is able to get the details out of it by placing the ID. And it happens how you can identify it and test it. You can test it by putting the APIs inside it. In the API itself, you can write the document ID or anything which is passed as a parameter in API request, right? If you are using Postman, you might be aware of like headers and then API request where you will pass that IDs, and that is how one of the basic check you can do there. So we have to implement authorization checks where user policies and hierarchies are written, and we should not rely on IDs that client sends or user ID that is stored in the session object. So this is how some of the prevention techniques of the BOLA, we call it as a BOLA basically in security. So it is one of the vulnerability. You can see there are multiple leaks happening associated to previously in 2021, there is one of the area where like 530 million Facebook users has been made publicly available, and it was due to the same incident where some of the users APIs was leaked. Some API of Facebook was evidently uh, we can actually tamper that API and place the different profile IDs, and then you can get that understanding of the same. And later on, basically we call it as a web scraping technique. So in that scraping area, people were able to identify it and get the details out of it. Similarly, Verizon Pay is one of the major provider. Like we got access of 2 million Verizon Pay monthly contracts out of it, and you can see just by placing the installment sale agreement ID, we are able to get the rest of the details of other owners, because that specific API was not BOLA secured. So that is why it happened, and it leads to a lot of financial crisis for the Verizon Pay as well. So, so by implementing certain BOLA checks, you will definitely save yourself. The second vulnerability in this category is broken authentication. So it the authentication are often implemented incorrectly, and it allows attackers to compromise authentication token to exploit the implementation. Basically, you can see in the example also the session ID is compromised, right? So if you get specific, if you are logging into the application and you get a specific session ID, and if it is valid, nowadays there is a possibility that you use MFA, or there is a timeout associated to session IDs. But if that is not in place, then you can use the same session ID, pass on to the different user, and then you can log in into the application and compromise the account. And that is how this specific vulnerability takes place. So it compromises an authentication token or exploit implementation flaws to assume the other user identity temporarily. So that is one of the area. Use how to prevent it. We have to check all the possible ways to authenticate the APIs. We have to understand for the password reset and one-time links, and you have to use MFAs if possible, and we have to authenticate the app with the right timeouts as well. So you can see this issue was also reached in the Office 365 Outlook. Previously, like there was a JWT token associated to this Office 365 Outlook. You can see in the example that it was supposed to be in the algorithm RS256, but in reality JWT were missing and allowing attacker to change the token. So they changed the token, accepted the evil token, and we are getting the similar amount of data out of the same. And this was identified by Outlook itself in the later on area and then fixed it. Similarly, major breach was affecting half of the all airline travel providers. This is one of the example of a platform, right, where you are using certain platform to access the airlines data, right? So this kind of PNR is been generated, and by simply changing the rule source one ID, you're able to view the PNR and access of a customer name and associated flight details. Because when you do any, even if you book any ticket, you can just put the PNR details and you will get the details of it, right? So by placing and changing the PNR IDs, it should not be anyone can view any other details apart from the confirmation of your ticket, right? So in this case, you are able to get a lot of other details as well for the multiple airlines, and that was one of the issues by this um, hacker and activist Noam Rotem working with safety detectives research lab. They have identified it basically at a point of time. So yeah, these were the two major breaches. Last in this bucket is broken function level authorization. So it it basically gives you control policies, basically like complex access control policies with different hierarchies, groups and roles have unclear separation in the same. Like if you can see in the example, like you have put API get slash API slash admin and all info instead of users. You have replaced that with admin and still he's able to understand the data. So the function is vulnerable in this case, and that is not protected. So we should not rely on the client to enforce the admin access by any way. Even if you have some admin URLs exposed, it is also able to uh, and get the file data from your application, and have to deny all the access by default. Like there should be no allow access for anything. It should be a deny access only until the user is authenticated user. He'll also able to get the specific respective functionalities as well. So that is where the function level, so you have changed the function and then it is able to get the data. Broken object level was at the object level where you are putting the IDs into it, or some kind of area of unique ID into it, which is getting the data. So these are the two different vulnerabilities and differences. So, and yeah, one last one is rate limiting in this specific category. That attackers rate limiting is very interesting one, which you have already seen. I guess like we have heard about a term called as DDoS attack, right? So DDoS attack is a certain area where like a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of applications are already on the fly. Take an example of Amazon and Flipkart, for example, if you are aware, or any two different two e-commerce giants, and now there's a sale happening, and on site inside the scene, like you wanted to slow down another business, right? So what you will attacker will do, if there is some wrong intent, right? At the same time when the sale was happening, I'll overload the existing application by putting a lot of load into it, by putting a lot of request, multiple API requests onto the application, and make sure that the application slows down so that the other person and the business get advantage out of it. And that is why it is important to understand the rate limiting feature as well. So basically, attacker overloads the API by sending more requests than it can handle, and it exceeds the API processing. There is a way to test it as well, and nowadays there are a lot of different policies associated to it. But yeah, we have to define proper rate limiting, limit the payload sizes, tailor the rate limiting to be matched with API methods, etc. So we'll see this in example also. So earlier there was a AWS DDoS attack happened in the similar fashion. Like 800 pound of gorilla cloud computing was hit by DDoS, and it was in February 2022, I guess. So because of that, like 2.3 terabytes per second of data was per second was put into the load, and the server got clogged. So later on they realized and then solved it. Similarly in GitHub you can see the spike, right? So at that specific point of time, like 1.35 trillion of APIs what hit, and then it made 1.35 terabytes per second actually, and it lasted for 20 minutes according to GitHub. So due to that, the application slowed down a lot in the specific area, which give gave a lot of hit to GitHub, and later on they fixed it all. So so that is why it is important to understand what is the rate limit of your application, and do we have a proper rate limiting mechanism in place as well. So now we'll quickly move on to the demo part of the thing, whatever we have discussed for the specific 4 vulnerabilities in the one bucket. We will start with first one. There are certain tools which we can use. I preferably like to go with Contra, but it is now becoming a paid one. Here you can also understand like each vulnerability. Like if I wanted to focus on OWASP top 10 of API, I can go to API one. I can understand each vulnerability. We talked about broken functional authorization. You can just click on next. You can understand how exactly it works and everything, which I will talk about. Yeah. Okay, yeah, it is working, I guess. Fine. We'll come back to this area later. So I will go with the uh, API security one, I guess. Yeah. So we'll go with the broken object level authorization. Give me a second if it is working. Yes. So the application CBS CareTech is an online presentation. We'll go with Contra if it is working right. Okay. So the CTO of CPS Tech has engaged a cybersecurity consultant Bob to perform regular penetration test against this specific application. So now will focus on Bola in this specific area. In this case, we have to put the email IDs here as mentioned. Okay. So this is one of the valid user, which is actually navigating to the application. Once he is signing in, attacking the surface mapping. So we are beginning our assessment by browsing through this application, and we are further identifying the test scenarios and develop a security test cases for the same. This is what our agenda is. Okay, this is what it happens. Fine then. Uh, Sorry for this. So I'll just go with the demo example which I have then. So this is the example of Bola. Like this is something which I've recorded previously also. Like we can use vulnerable test API vulweb.com for testing this kind of API security kind of application. So you can see like I have added one collection in my postman, and inside it there are certain parameters added to it, like different areas, different post requests are there. So you can see in the specific API there is a post ID associated. Like if I hit on post ID 23, you can see I'm getting the valid response like post ID 20, post ID 23, user ID, title, content, and created at all this response. But you can, but if I change this ID to 25, still I am able to get the same response out of it, like that. See, so basically it is a part of a broken object level authorization, because I'm posting that ID into the different ID, but the user is same. uh, so still I'm able to access the other application or IDs and then post some data into it, like so that is one of the checks which you can do while having the Bola kind of vulnerability. So the next one is lack of resource and low rate limiting rate. So we'll see that like there is an API called as comments API where you can post the comments, right, into the application. So what we will do, we will try to post multiple comments on application. Consider a scenario of Discord. Like we have to make sure that the Discord will get hanged after putting a lot of requests onto it, so that the competitor gets each. So what I'll do, I'll just intrude it. We are using tool burp suite for the scene, for doing the brute force attack. We call it as a brute force also. So we will change the parameter which you wanted to brute force. Like I have changed the parameter of the payload from uh, 1 to 1000, for example. Okay, so I'm hitting 1000 request actually, and you can do sequential execution or even parallel execution on the scene. So once you start an attack, you can see that it is hitting multiple requests simultaneously, and it will go up to 1000 until it is stopped. So all the comments will be hitted. You can see the comment test comment 9, test comment 10. So basically it is also another way to tamper the system, or put a lot of spam onto the system as well. So there are a lot of intrusion mechanism in place as well to make sure that it doesn't happen right now. But this is how you can test your rate limit of your application, and we also call it as a DDoS attack. Okay, so these are the two of the example which we saw for the one of the API security aspects. Like, okay, I'll go to the presentation. I'll go to the next area. So data protection. So when we talk about data protection, there are three important vulnerabilities inside it, like excessive data exposure, mass assignment, and injection. So excessive data exposure is specifically like when you're putting exceptions, or when you're writing any test code for the same. You're not about to give a lot of information out of it, or else it will be tracked out, or it will be used for it can be misused in the future. So we are also making sure that you are not accessing a lot of data out of any warnings or any kind of while handling exceptions. So that is what the example is also showing. Like super safe have Bob's profile name Bob million bananas, but there is some error, and you can see he is able to get 200 OK request as well. But still, he is also able to get in the response user profile pic, user ID, name, role. Apart from that, hobbies, address. So it is very excessive data which you are giving out of the API. So we need to make sure that you're not whatever is requested, that is only present in the API rather than what is not requested as well. So if you get that kind of data, then other hacker or attacker will get an edge over it, and then they can perform certain actions on top of that. Mass assignment is another area. Like uh, it takes the data the client provides and store it with proper filtering for whitelisted properties. So attacker can try to guess the object properties or provide additional object properties in the request, and read the documentation or check out the API endpoint for the clues. Like if you can see the malicious data, you can see the username alias pass 12345 role and admin is the another area which I've added into that parameter. So he tried to put that area and check if the same API is legitimate or not. If it is legitimate, then it is a mass assignment vulnerability. The injection is very common, like you might have seen about heard about it as well. SQL injection, and there are multiple areas to it, like SQL injection. Like if you are putting the same conditions and the condition is true, then you will get a valid output out of it. Even if when you are putting some entering any field and putting some SQL queries into any input field and you are getting SQL errors, then you can definitely understand like it is vulnerable for SQL injection, and there is a chance of a database leak out of it. So it is very common vulnerabilities also, but people handle it nowadays very well. So that is why it it is not top in the top 10 in API, it is at 8 level. There are two major examples, chess.com and Uber. Both was having the similar area. Like in case of chess.com, like API vulnerability that allowed arbitrary account takeover in chess.com. It has an API to locate another user to exchange message with your friends, basically. So in chess, there is a chat option also available, and it actually shares the login and session ID basically into it, session ID. So that session ID can be used in admin portal, and then it was exposing certain amount of data which is not required as a part of a response. So still session ID was there, and then that session ID was used to do, like, it is a chaining of vulnerabilities. Like we have seen like in broken authentication and authorization, right, at the vulnerability. But if you get a wrong session, if you get a valid session ID, you can try to do the attack and get the account, right, details out of it. So similarly it was happening. You are getting the session ID from the excessive data, and then you're using that same session ID to penetrate the application. That is what the chain is happening, and that is how hacker also gain the access of the specific API and the application. Similarly in Uber, there's also a name associated. I've written that Anand Prakash has found a way to do a full account takeover on Uber. So Uber is a very big application, and still it missed on the certain things in 2019. Still, so there is a add driver call that includes the phone number or email address of the user. So this makes the API leak the UUID of the users in the question in the returned error message. So there was an error message, and inside it the UUID was returning. So was a method called as get consent screen details, and if you pass that UID to it, it leaks all the user information into it, and it was very sensitive information which you are getting out of the Uber application. And if you just type random UUID, you'll also get the details, and it was a full account takeover as well, and you can do some malicious action into it. So this was a person who was not aware of, mostly not from the IT background, but still he tried to get the details of it and then crack this Uber security bug, uncovered it. Well, later on it was recognized as well. So you can see like major companies, we mostly say that like the major providers will take care of everything, but it is not the case. You have to understand this API level security very well, so that even if there are certain applications which are working on, there might have API issues which you need to uncover by having these basic checks in place as well. So for this, I have another demo. So I was about to showcase it to Contra, but it is asking for credentials. So I'll share some demo from this side here. Okay. Uh, Fortunately, I've recorded the thing. Okay. So this is an excessive data exposure vulnerability. You can see like I'm clicking on forget password. I'm adding the email associated to it in the request receipt link, and analyzing the request out of it. Okay. So when I'm clicking on the next button, you can see I'm getting the last login details. I'm also getting the reset link with password and the token associated to it. Okay. So I understood that there is an excessive information present. So what I'll do, I'll put that link into it, the link which I got in the uh, exception basically, and paste that. And once you see that, like I am able to navigate to the recent reset password mechanism of the previous account and able to do the account takeover. Here we are also able to see the code base of the same, like how, why it is happening, and how we can remediate it also from our side. Okay. So you can see like if the email is valid, the reset password link has been generated via generate reset link for method. Okay. So here that is email was passed if there is a valid email, which was valid in the previous case. Okay. So what we need to change basically here, that we have made a lot of excessive information, right, given into the response. That response entity needs to be changed, that only the necessary response has to be provided. This is basically a Java code. If you are not aware of it, then it is fine, but else the bottom line is you should not share excessive information in the exception. Okay. I'm not sure if I have another demo. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, I'll go to the next part then. So the last three things were security misconfiguration, improper access management, and insufficient logging. So these are the three governance kind of security issues which we get in APIs majorly. That security misconfiguration is a server-side request forgery, uh, and it talks about like if you have APIs fetching the remote resource URLs, or incomplete or ad hoc configuration, or cross-origin resource sharing kind of thing. So it talks about the same. Improper asset management is more about like whenever you're working on any application, you have multiple environments like assets like production environment, QA environment, development environment, a pre-prod environment, and you have endpoints associated to each of the environments. Mostly you do testing on production in pre-prod or in the QA environment, right? But you need to make sure that that environment is sanitized well. If your application and your development is stopped and then you are now working on the production environment, you have to make sure that the previous environment and the assets associated to that environment are proper, right? And that is where this assess management comes into the picture. I will also see the example like how important it is in the next demo. Similarly, insufficient logging and monitoring, like if you're not logging right amount of error messages, and you do not have monitoring tools in place, it is easy to tamper the system. Like if you are putting a lot of DDoS and you're not having a monitoring tool in place to understand it, then it will take a lot of time to debug and understand like from what happened and what area it happened. So that is about insufficient logging and monitoring. So the recent examples, like in Twitter, like there was a misconfiguration in Twitter developer portal, and it caused browser to cache API keys, account access tokens, and account secrets. So so it is majorly for the Twitter advertiser, and it was exploited by the scene. But in case of Just Dial, it was very uh, easy peasy, like kind of vulnerabilities which they got some people. Like basically Just Dial is India's #1 local search engine, and what was happening, the scenario was like they are using some pre-prod environment to test the application, right? And that pre-prod environment API had some, only the URL had some little bit of difference from the production URL, and someone cracked that out. Someone understood like there is a pre-prod URL which in place, and they forgot to sanitize that environment. The all the database and everything was related and put it. They have actually made secure the production environment, but they have left that old API environment running with unprotected and access to the database. So 100 million users of data got leaked due to this small issue, which you can say the negligence from the team, that they forgot to sanitize the previous environment, and it comes under improper asset management only. So due to that, the other person got all the advantage, like hacker got a lot of advantage, and then 100 millions of user data is compromised. So we need to make sure that whatever we are using on cloud or anything, you are sanitizing that thing. You are making sure that everything is encrypted, and everything has proper authentication mechanism in place and authorization mechanism in place. You are using MFAs in most of the areas wherever applicable. So this is the difference for OWASP top 10, 19 and 23. Coming to the last part. So before that, I'll just show you the demo for that scene, which I have already got it for you guys to save time. Yeah. So this is insufficient logging demo, right? So once I'm logging into the application, now we have to make sure that what kind of vulnerability we can carve out, and we'll focus on insufficient logging in this specific area. So if I click on account, so it provides a lot of REST API to retrieve the project, and to securely access the code base REST API, private access token must be passed. Okay, so you can see it has passed the application. You can go in the application log. It is accessing the application by getting the application log. Like whenever you're executing an application, there is a logging happening in the background, right? So you can see that we have passed a certain private token with the code doc link, and there is we have executed it on the console, and you can see didn't so in the background, like it should log that there was some activity happening with respect to the private token. It has not logged the right thing. It has just logged returning cached instance of a singleton bean, which is very inappropriate to understand like what happened in the background. And this lack of evidence will leak will the security incident response team will not able to identify what was the issue, because we have certain alerts in place which fetch the data from the logs itself, and if you're not logging it, then it can occur a security breach. It can be a missed area for the same. So that is what the vulnerability is basically. It is a specifically code level vulnerability or console like logs level vulnerability, where you should log a valid thing. And it is what it is saying, like when you're analyzing the code, you should log this. Whatever timestamp, method, URI, IP, whatever it is present, you should log that. It was not present earlier. Once you do it now, we'll put the same request after changing some code. Yeah. So you can see there is a get request happened API before projects with the specific IP. So it gives an age where you can now go back and see like which IP hit what kind of application. Okay. So that was it about this demo part. So yeah, I was on the topic like what are the new ones? Inside the new ones in 2023 API, broken object property level authorization was updated. and it has a merging of excessive data exposure and mass assignment. Rest of the thing remains still the same. There are certain new ones added like unrestricted access to sensitive business flows, SSRF, which we have seen in the previous one also, and unsafe consumption of APIs. That is new one. Like you must have seen a lot of spams and messages you get on emails and everything. So you should not directly click on that API and then use it, because it might capture your cookies and other session data associated to it, which is very harmful for you. Then these are some sample API mitigation strategies which you should understand. Like validate the parameters uh, before checking anything, and inputs and output validations. Use schema validation in place. Then apply explicit threat detection technique, like blacklist dangerous tags like script, virus scanning of the attachment, which is happening nowadays in by default in the platform. And turn on SSL everywhere where possible. Use MFAs, apply rigorous authentication and authorization areas, OAuth for authentication and authorization. Use proven solutions, API gateways, threat detection technique, confidentiality and integrity audit management system in place to safeguard yourself. So these are some security best practices, like prioritize security, use a strong authentication and authorization solution. Use OAuth for a single sign-on option, API firewalling, encrypt traffic using TLS, remove information that's not meant to be shared, which we saw in excessive data exposure. Don't expose more data than necessary. Use rate limiting in place, impossible, to avoid DDoS attack basically. Then these are certain tools and learning materials which you should understand. Like these are multiple tools, like Astra is one of the tools, Burp Suite, Postman, Docker security is one of the area where you can use scanning of your containerization and multiple things. So there are multiple tools, but the intent is same. Like even if you use a lot of tools, you will get a vulnerability report. But for understanding the report, you should understand the basics of it, and that is what we have learned. Like, tool might be changing, but you need to understand like what exactly it is implicating, and what kind of impact it happens on the application. And these are some key pointers. Like APIs are everywhere, and we should focus on security aspects to it, rather than just focusing on the functional areas. Exploit your APIs through your API with bad data, bad user token. Have a habit of writing a test case in such a way that we'll have this. We already do it, like as a part of API testing. We already do a negative test cases, but we are not just aware of the concept, like what this test case is for and what it is calling. If you're putting wrong ID and wrong session ID, or even the wrong user ID, it is basically reflecting to broken object or broken function your authorization. But we are not aware of that specific area. So try to do that and map that with the security aspects to it. Automate the security, inject security into DevOps practices to expedite the process. And learn about manual API security to analyze the reports and avoid the false positives, because most of the tools gives you false positives as well. So you need to analyze it, understand it, if it is really impacting the application by the help of CVSs or CVEs, and then you give the report to the practice or the team. There are some good references like APIsecurity.io, OWASP API Security project. I'll go through it for you guys as well. Uh, so there are certain tutorials like this. You can say this Avat TAO basically. This is you can try some good things out here. I guess used some guest plugin, so that is why it is not giving me that area to try these things out. But these are some live examples also which you can test for the latest breach. Okay. OWASP API OWASP API top 10. If you put on internet, you will get information about the security project, which you can see, which you can go through each of the vulnerability and understand well. Apart from that, you can use Burst Suite Learning Center. Okay, so once you go to this Web Security Academy, you can see uh, lot of different area where you can go to each lab basically and understand like how to do the specific vulnerability and checks, and it is free. This one is free actually, so you can use the learning paths and understand the security aspects to it by using this Portswigger learning academy kind of thing. Okay. uh, yeah, so yep, that is it from my side. So thank you for hearing the session.